Legends Lounge at Toronto Marriott City Centre is the scene for Sports Interaction State of Toronto. Let's get right into this, right off the top, and hit me with your best takes. Is this the lowest point in Toronto sports history with the Big Four?
I don't think so. I mean, look,
There's been worse than this?
I feel like there has been.
Okay.
Maybe the early 2000s, or maybe that's just my my Raptors slant to this whole thing. It wasn't really great for basketball in Toronto, especially in the early 2000s post Vince Carter. But I mean, for the rest of the league, I mean, there was no TFC, right? The Jays, I can't remember them being that involved in any type of World Series stuff. The Leafs were at that same point, right? Trying to get out of the first round, right? It just feels like it was about the same, maybe a little bit worse.
Andrew?
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it's when I'm trying to keep the timeline straight in my head, right? But when were the Dion Phaneuf days of the Leafs, and when you had that kind of mess going on, and TFC was sort of in its early days. The Blue Jays weren't relevant until halfway through the 2015 season. I'm sure there was some over. The Raptors were stronger then, I think, but still obviously a ways away from 2019. So I think that there was some overlap of those miserable years for all of those franchises that may have been worse.
Then let's take it in a different direction. As the core four, the teams we're talking about, is this the most disliked group of four among the fan base right now because of the misfortunes of the playoffs, the lack of playoffs, the building, everything like that, Kristen?
I think there's just a frustration with the fact that teams are making the playoffs, but it's not getting them anywhere. We're not seeing that championship potential outside of the Raptors over the last however many years. And there's an excitement that builds up to, hey, these teams are getting in the postseason and there's an opportunity there. And then it's just like they're not taking advantage of it. And obviously the FC as well had that success championship wise. But when it comes to like the Blue Jays, and everyone will get ramped up and then it just doesn't happen. And same with the Leafs. Everybody gets so excited and it doesn't go anywhere. So I think from that perspective, there's more frustration than maybe you felt because there's just maybe wasted potential.
Because I think because of the expectation for all the teams, there is hope for all these teams before the season begins, with the exception maybe of the Raptors this time around.
That's fair.
Yeah. But a year ago at the trade deadline, great, let's build, right?
Yeah,
didn't work out.
They have hit
right?
They've hit the reset button. They're going into
right. They are now, but before each season, TFC, prior to this season, okay, there were still J2 sports fans from last season. Prior to last season, there was great hope. Insigne, Bernadeschi, these great players. TFC can win the cup. It was the worst season in TFC history. The Jays, again, a competitive team, or so we thought. Right? Even entering this season, a decent team. It hasn't worked out that way. So I think it might be at the low point right now because of this hope. It's hope that kills you, right? And we've all experienced it, I think, to start this season.
But that's something that I hear a lot is like, this is what we were promised. We were told this is going to be a championship team. This is going to be a real contender. And then, the Jays in particular, but I think it goes across the sports.
It's a common theme amongst the four.
It feels like they were sold a field of goods. They're paying so much money for tickets. They invest so much time in, and they are just absolutely not getting what they feel almost entitled to based on the words and the actions of the team, heading into these seasons that are just becoming so frustrating.
But let's not kid ourselves.
Bad seasons, right? They went through the bad seasons expecting that now is when the payoff's going to be, and it's not happening.
I think one thing you mentioned about the expensiveness of it is another aspect that really makes people a little bit more, I guess, on edge, because there's the expectations, there's the ticket prices, there's the cost of living in Toronto too. And so that all builds up in this sort of tension of, hey, we need to get to that point where a team wins a championship, a team gets past the second round of the playoffs. Like this, you need that expectations, but you also need reality to sort of set in for a lot of these teams.
Faces of the city, the sports city. If we're building a Mount Rushmore in 2024, who are the four faces we are putting on the Toronto sports scene?
One from each team.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. And who are they?
Well, listen, I mean, I'll go the TFC angle here, right? And obviously, we would like it to be Lorenzo Insigne or Bernadeschi, these high-priced superstars who are still, quite honestly, repairing their reputations right now. So I think for TFC, it has to be Jonathan Osorio, who's a kid that came through the ranks at TFC, has been there for longer than any other player in the history of the club. The captain, a Canadian boy, he's there for sure for me.
And I think we know who with the Toronto, because that might be the easiest of the group, in my opinion.
Well, Austin Matthews absolutely is the face of the Leafs. He has become, I just think, a beacon of Toronto sport, which is so unexpected given for an Arizona kid. But and he really just exemplifies what that hope and that promise was supposed to be. It's like you draft a player number 1 overall, you think he's the one taking you to the promised land. You don't want to see a face of your city not be able to deliver.
Yeah.
For the Blue Jays, I think it's David Schneider. I mean, he's
not the highest.
That's a curveball. I mean, Bo is there, Vlad's there. They've been the big dogs, the guys you would talk about. But for me, David Schneider, even though he's in a bit of a funk right now, he's sort of emblematic of like the fans' dislike of the front office. And I could have used an even more incendiary word than that. He's the guy who came in. He had a huge start. That ridiculous run when he came up as a rookie last year, and the Jays seem to have not really been willing to give him the kind of run and the kind of runway to take a job until well into this season. And I think people sort of saw that as an indictment of whatever is going on in the front office there. And also he's a guy who, he pulls the ball in the air. He's not doing the all fields thing. He's not spraying singles into the opposite field. He's, a guy who kind of looks more like a prototypical power hitter, or a guy who just like fits better into the offensive environment of Major League Baseball right now. And is just the kind of guy that this team needs more of.
That's shocking to me, honestly. I mean, again,
it's always that Bo and Vlad conversation.
Yeah. I see more Vlad and Bo jerseys than whatever.
But that just simplifies. It just shows where it's gone wrong though for the Jays. Yeah, it should be an easy.
Okay,
it should be Vlad.
Okay, speaking of going wrong, would it be Scotty Barnes or would it be Drake? Because there is that conversation.
I don't think it should be Drake after he lost the battle. I don't know if that could be the case, but no, it's probably Scotty. Your kind of point on this was interesting, but you could argue Masai Ujiri just because of how important he's been over the last decade plus for this team. But I think in terms of players, it has to be Scotty Barnes. I mean, he turned into a Rookie of the Year, All-Star, all of those things. They've very easily centered this team in the future around him. They're relying on him to become one of the faces of the league.
Yeah. So with some of the situations with what's happening in Toronto, the rest of Canada is kind of enjoying this in a sense, where there is a lot of hate towards the Toronto-based teams and so forth. So if you're living outside of the Toronto-based teams and cheering, because as you know, Kristen, and the Raptors, and there's a lot of fans in Western Canada that love the Jays and love the Leafs. You can go to any barn in Canada, there will be Leaf fans. Trust me, I've seen it myself. Well, what do you say to them as far as what the future looks like and how that actually could change soon?
Well, the thing with the Leafs, I do think that there is a faction of the rest of Canada that very much enjoys that the Leafs they've drafted these players, they've built this team, and it never goes their way. And it always Game 7, your starting goaltender has, pulled us back. Like, I mean, who else does that happen to except the Maple Leafs? Like, who's got the voodoo doll? Like, it's just, it's crazy. But there is, as you say, I think there's a certain part of the population that enjoys it. And then there's another part that feels it as deeply, I think, as fans in Toronto do. And that's the power that the Leafs have, is that they can be perhaps the most hated, but also the most loved of the Toronto teams all at the same time. And that just goes to show, I think, the frustration that we talked about before, setting in again and again, and why it feels like it's slipping away, the opportunity, the moment. And the more that it slips, the more people get like, just the hatred almost piles up even more, even if you love them, because you're like, we've wasted it again.
We've watched this show again.
We've seen this play before.
I think it's different though for TFC and for the Leafs. You're competing against other markets with other teams. TFC has Montreal and Vancouver, right? So much as might be some TFC fans around there, it's a young team. The Whitecaps have an established football culture out there from years ago. Montreal too, with the impact. TFC is quite new. Whereas you look at the Jays and the Raptors, right? One team in the country, they can be Canada's team, right? I know the Leafs are, it's kind of sorry to fans, but kind of Canada's team, just because there's more fans around the country, which, you can debate that. Or that's the reality.
I will say, though, the fact that Edmonton is in the finals and everybody is saying, we can't root on or cheer for Edmonton, even though, like, there's a chance they could be, hopefully, the first Canadian team to win the Cup. I think that's ridiculous. That just seems, I don't know, it's wrong to me. Like, you know what I mean? Win the chip. you get the love. I don't know.
It's strange. It's almost like it feels like you'd be cheating on your own favorite team. Yeah. Be like, oh, I hope Edmonton
And you
wins.
are.
Yeah.
And it does.
100% you
It
are.
does really
It's unforgivable.
It is. I mean, they know. They know if you are a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, but you're hoping that Edmonton wins, somehow they're gonna know.
Yeah,
You can't have second teams.
No.
You just can't. You love the team, you hate everyone else. That's the way sports is.
Let's focus on the Toronto Blue Jays. All comments are welcome, of course, and this isn't going to get much better. I'll tell you that. Simply put, with the Jays, a lot of people look at Ross Atkins and the job he has done. Going to be 10 years, by the way, coming up in December, which is kind of hard to believe, considering the financial investment. Has he wasted the best years of Vlad and Bo, who were those marquee kids? You look at Vlad, signed as a 16-year-old. Has he wasted those best years with some of his decision making?
I think so. I mean, I think the players have wasted those years as well, right? I mean, I think Vlad, you look at him right now, he looks like a leadoff hitter. He's not hitting for power. Bo isn't hitting for power. Those are, the most valuable hits that there are in the game. So the fact that they are not helping to carry this offense, and the fact that the team, I think, understandably believed in them, when they moved on from Marcus Semien, when they moved on from Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr., and sort of put the ball in their hands, they have some blame to go around there as well. But I think, Ross Atkins I'll find a way to defend him. I'm sure I'll do it at some point here. But I mean, overall, if we're talking about, what the personnel on the field looks like, what the Major League Baseball environment looks like, it's just not a team that's ready to score runs. And that's killing.
Well, I'm going to take that in a different direction
Sure.
now with you too. So beyond the team that we see on the field, this minor league system sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So can we honestly say that Ross Atkins has done a good job? Because there was a lot of complaints when he started that the cupboards are bare. And he hasn't filled them at all in almost a decade of managing this team.
Yeah, I think that's a completely valid criticism. I think that, there are some guys who've been traded away. You've had Alek Manoah blow up. You've had, you can make excuses all the way down the line. But ultimately, I mean, for a team that, especially this front office coming in and saying that we're a player development organization. They've invested a lot in the player development complex in Dunedin, and it was not supposed to be like this. And, he will go in the media and say, oh, we like all these guys in Buffalo, and we've seen some success stories out of there. David Schneider, who I mentioned, Spencer Horwitz is playing very well to start his big league career. But there's not enough there. And every time the last couple of years when the trade deadline comes around or in the winter, who are they going to trade to get a Juan Soto? They don't have those horses. And that's become as much of a problem as it is on the field when your starting pitchers start to go down and now they don't have anybody to come up and they're doing bullpen days. And that's an issue. I think, Atkins has to wear that.
I think the four of you probably have an opinion on this one for sure too, but I'll throw it out there. Ross Atkins, worst general manager in the history of Toronto sports?
I remember Gordash. So
Gordash, okay.
No, there has to be a word. I mean,
I challenge you to tell me.
Worst ever.
Worst ever.
There's been some bad ones, right?
Yeah. Well, some people will sit there and say JP Ricciardi, but he always had a quote, right? And but Atkins simply doesn't even say anything. So as frustrated as the fan base is, you look at him and say, you got to give me something. I know there's probably an argument for John Ferguson Jr. I think there's a lot of us that probably say that.
But with Atkins, it's accountability. It's, there have been maybe poor general managers, but at least they've taken some accountability for their role.
I think that's fair.
The team.
Yep.
I don't know that I've gotten that sense from Atkins that he's really stepped up and been like, this is where it's gone wrong. This is how we're going to fix it, and actually followed that up.
Well, it's because you don't know what he's saying anytime he gets in front of a microphone, right? You have to peel back layers of corporate speak to even, find a kernel of what he's, intending to say. And it's all, he never closes a door. It's all wishy-washy.
I thought you were going to try to defend him. But...
I'm looking for the
but I think that in terms of his resume, if you take the communication aspect out of it, which you can't, I think he's led this team and had some really good years. And I think if if Springer and Alejandro Kirk hit the way that they should have last year, that's a really good team. And I think that they still have a chance this year to be a pretty decent team. MLB is helping them. Rob Manfred adding an extra playoff team makes it a little bit easier for them to stay in the middle and stay in the race. And maybe good things can happen that way. But it has been, he's been an extremely frustrating GM, I think, for a lot of people because of the communication issues. And it just never stops. It's just every time he goes out and speaks, it's people roll their eyes and get upset about him again and remember all the reasons that they don't like this guy.
Do you think
tough.
the attachment to Shapiro as well, it works against him to a certain point as well? There's Bill and Ben.
I
Flat
think
out man.
I think maybe, but I think Shapiro ends up cleaning up his mess a lot. Like and that's that's a really curious thing. I mean, Shapiro on the business side, say what you will about the hands in everybody's pocket. They've done a nice job with the renovations, and you feel like the business situation is good. He's got the trust of Rogers and of Edward Rogers. Payroll is in a really good spot. But yeah, the guy that he lets run the baseball operations, I think that everybody, even the most staunch defender of Ross Atkins would be like, yeah, I think so. A new pair of eyes couldn't hurt this organization. Yeah.
The other thing is, the average fan doesn't care as much about the business side, though.
No,
they turn on the
100%.
TV or they come to a game and they want to see results on the pitch, on the court, on the ice, on the field. They want to see the result. They don't care how much you spend on renovation because, like we say, there's fans in Vancouver that are never going to come and watch the Blue Jays live, but they want to see the fruits of the supposed labors. And I think that's maybe where the disconnect is a lot for the fan base is you can tout all of the business accomplishments, but if you don't win, who cares?
Earlier in the year, Sports Interaction had a prop with who would be the next manager to replace John Schneider. That's always been a hot topic of conversation, depending on where this team goes and so forth. So I'll ask the group this. So is it almost time, if John Schneider does get dismissed, is it time to bring in somebody with a track record? Or does it really matter, considering that from a fan's perspective, you look at how the team is actually run, and it's almost like it's the analytics team that is running the operations, and whatever the analytics team is really the manager of the ball club.
Yeah, you saw very little, I think, change from moving from Charlie Montoyo to John Schneider. Yeah, so that's John Gibbons is out there. There's the desperation plan. I mean, the Blue Jays have played that card before, right? Cito came back, things got tough, right? Yeah.
So, how much does coaching impact the game in baseball?
That's hard to say, really, but I mean, obviously, like the in-game decision making is a thing, but I think the way they talk about it is a lot of stuff is game planned out. A lot of stuff is thought about beforehand. That
and
was
it's dictated by the front office a lot, right?
I mean, I don't know if it's dictated, but it's worked on with a bunch of people with a bunch of factors, and it's not like the old days where a guy's just managing by his gut. That's definitely a thing, and that drives people nuts. I think that it's probably a good thing to have more information and to think about it that way, but it's never not going to drive people nuts.
Toronto FC, championship to god awful to pretty decent right now. Actually, it's not a bad product on the field, and there are some aspirations for a playoff opportunity as well. Let me ask you this, James. Outside of what we see at that stadium, the 20,000+ people every single game, does Toronto care about TFC?
Not yet. I think it's getting there, certainly. You listen, I've said it over and over again, and people laugh when I say that we're not a football nation just yet, right? Yeah. But we're not, and it's a work in progress. TFC is so young. It's in its infancy. 2007 is when it was born. Now back then it was a party place to go, right? Now all those young people partying back in 2007 are now older, having kids, and their kids are becoming TFC fans. Yeah. So you're building this culture externally, right? And that's going to only grow as the game grows in this country with the World Cup in a couple of years' time. MLS itself is growing bigger and bigger. It's one of the top leagues in world football right now. Top 5, top 6 leagues within a decade is quite possible. Yeah. It's a great destination right now. So as the game grows, so will TFC and its importance. But yeah, I think it's a work in progress for sure. I think they've got the right man at the helm now in John Herdman, who just, what he does is he builds cultures. Yeah. He did it with the women's national team, the men's national team. Both those are broken when he took over. Yeah. He rebuilt that from the beginning. And TFC was also broken. That room was smashed last season. It was divided. He comes in and already we're seeing it quicker than we thought we would see it. This improvement and this collective growing together. So, TFC's, I think they're going places. I really believe that. This may not be the year, but outside the actual club itself, as the game grows, so too will they.
Great segue into this one. So John Herdman, you mentioned some of his past resume builders, and it's been tremendous. Let me ask you this. Greatest head coach in Canadian sports history?
Well, that's a stretch. I mean, listen, John Herdman's really good.
Yeah.
All right. He didn't win with the women. He did really well. They got a couple of bronze medals. Mm-hmm. Where TFC hasn't won yet. With the men gotten to a World Cup, hasn't won. There's been some pretty great coaches in Toronto sports history who have championship rings right? And until John Herman does that, I don't think he can be in that conversation, but he's very good.
Who is part of that conversation?
I think Nick Nurse has to be up there just because
Okay.
won the championship as a rookie head coach. That's
Sure.
hard to do. I think he's still well respected in the NBA as one of the best, kind of like genius type minds, tactically, especially. Culture setting wise, probably not as good as Herdman, but tactically, he has to be up there for sure.
Who are we throwing in that Jays conversation?
Cito Gaston, I think, obviously,
Yeah.
and a guy who, should have had a much longer career and should have had other looks elsewhere, and probably would have been a Hall of Famer, and still has a chance, I think, to be a Hall of Famer with the Veterans Committee stuff, and 100% deserve it.
Yeah, and with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Punch Imlach.
Okay.
That's a lot difference. That's a lot difference.
Well, if we're talking championships,
Yes,
then
that's
we
true.
have to turn
That
back
is true.
to
Yeah, a little.
I mean-
that clock goes way.
No pressure on Craig Berube at all. He'll be just fine.
We could talk about Pat Quinn. We could talk about
Yeah.
Pat Burns. There are some good coaches there, but
Two very good coaches.
yeah, two beloved coaches as well, especially in this city. Absolutely, I think you could put them out there.
That's the thing, beloved or good, right? They're different things.
Yeah.
Because they didn't win either. They were really good teams who we celebrate as champions,
Oh yeah.
but didn't get to a Stanley Cup final,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is crazy to me how
Yeah.
we champion them. But they haven't actually done that much with Canada, but they were beloved because their character, their teams played a certain way.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's exactly what you say, but played a certain way. I still believe that there is a sense in Toronto of how they want Maple Leaf teams to play. And there were certain coaches that brought that out of them. Craig Berube may be another coach that can bring that out of this team.
Yeah.
And that would be a massive turning point, I think. But you're right about how they played.
Yeah, well, Mitch Marner's a power forward this time next year. Well done, Craig. You got it.
So the beloved and good thing can also kind of parallel itself, right? I mean, John Gibbons, for example, I mentioned him earlier, was not beloved until the team got good, and that dynamic I think is there too, right? Yes, there are sorts of external things and things about character and the way a team plays, and maybe baseball is just different in this sense, but there are definitely guys where people wanted him gone for a long time. He was gone at one point, and then now he's Saint Gibby, who people would welcome back with open arms, I think.
But there's been so few champions, right? If you we
Absolutely.
just discussed
Yeah.
this, it's like,
Yeah.
wow.
You get
Nurse.
narrowed down.
Cito.
Yeah. That's why.
Punch him up.
If we're talking about culture setters, if we're talking about someone that sets a culture and sort of in a reverse order of Gibbons is Dwayne Casey, just because he sort of set the foundation for what Nick Nurse eventually took over and turned into a championship team. But like those guys don't get credit, right? Those type of head coaches don't often get the credit they deserve for laying the foundation for what eventually becomes a winning team.
Well, Greg Vanny won the championship at TFC. Had
That's
some
true.
very good teams there.
That's right.
Built a team as well.
Yeah.
And since he left, they've struggled, right?
Should have won two, actually.
Should have won two. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's close the chapter on this by asking this question: more relevant franchise in Toronto, the Argos or TFC?
TFC.
TFC.
When are the Argos kicking off anyway? When does the season
Stop
start?
it, Charlie.
I mean, you're not wrong. He is not wrong. And the other thing about the Argos and TFC particularly is that TFC has the global aspect of soccer and footy. Like that aspect impacts everything. So not as much in football. I don't think so.
Very good. Toronto Maple Leafs. Let's chat some Leafs hockey here. As a group, the sentiment is this team is disliked by the fan base. True or false?
I don't think disliked is the right word.
Hated?
I think disappointed.
Disappointed.
I think disappointed in. And I think that's completely fair. We've been talking about expectations and we've been talking about the promise. This was supposed to be the best decade for the Leafs. They were supposed to get through being the worst team in the league. They were supposed to get Austin Matthews. They had Mitch Marner. They had William Nylander. They had Morgan Riley. They had all of the pieces they had. Mike Babcock was the coach. Everything was supposed to be in place. And it just never has worked out for them. In the playoffs, it just is not happening. And that is completely the opposite of what they do in the regular season. You have 2 50-plus win seasons in a row. You've got 3 seasons in a row with more than 100 points. You have the potential. You know the talent is there. You know that they can do it. It's just that then they get to the postseason and it's like they forgot. All of the things that all the things that worked in the regular season would still work in the playoffs if they could do it. And so that's where you become disappointed in, is it a culture thing? Like you talk about, is it just a mindset? There's so many factors of what it could be, but I just think disappointment because the window will close. And if this window closes and they go back into a rebuild, it just feels like it was for nothing.
Yeah, it really does, actually. Okay, so right now we're seeing the Edmonton Oilers go on this magical run. Let's just imagine that this is the Toronto Maple Leafs in this sort of situation, and they are in the Stanley Cup final. Watching this fan base, is a Stanley Cup final run as seen as a positive, or is it a bust if they don't win the Stanley Cup?
Well, I would think that given the excitement level over potentially winning Game 7 of a first-round playoff series,
They were very excited beating the Boston
I think just getting to a cup final would be such an unexpected, unbelievable, just accomplishment that of course you would want them to win once they got there. But even that, you could feel like, okay, they did something. Like they got somewhere, whereas spinning your wheels every spring just doesn't feel like the right return for this group. And it's not their potential. There's more there than what they're showing. And that's I think the undercurrent of, when Brendan Shanahan comes out and says, everything's on the table. We could do anything over the next little while. What does this team even look like going into September? Who's here? Who's not? Who's in net? Like there's question marks in a big way for a team that, if they were to find a way to go on a run, I mean, look at Florida last year, 8th seed, they go to the cup final. This year, expectations changed. They were one of the best teams all year, but they still got to the cup final. It can go either way. And I think for the Leafs, if they were to get to that point, I don't think anything could stop them.
I remember 93, right? I'm that old. And that run to the
We still see the highlights to
finals.
this day. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Dougie Arndt. The wraparound against St. Louis. Was that 94? Anyway, regardless. It was an amazing time, right, as a Leaf fan. And it was about the journey getting to the semi-finals, the conference finals, right? Not even the final. And how the city just embraced that team. And to this day, that team is beloved. They did a parade for that team. So I know there's frustration now and you're right, disappointment. But I think if they got to the final, this city would burn.
Because it would at least be something.
Yeah.
It would be something that you could say for the Leafs that was a positive. And I think that's what fans want more than anything. It's just the opportunity to be able to say, we saw them get somewhere.
Okay, let's go negative. John Tavares' contract, worst in franchise history?
Well, no.
Okay.
Get the blanket with the Leafs.
David Bastl was pretty bad.
That's cute.
40 plus goals the first year. I mean, that was something. That was a good year. He's performed well. He just hasn't performed as a 40 plus goal scorer every year. I mean, you look back at his numbers, he's not that far off of a point per game. He's a better defensive player now than he was before, but it's all about expectation. It's about what do you have when you have John Tavares that you don't have because you have John Tavares? What could you have instead if you had only signed him to a 5-year deal?
That's the big question for Leaf fans.
Exactly.
Right?
And that it's not that Tavares is a bad player or that you wouldn't want him, but maybe you could get someone better if you had him off the books 3 years ago.
A defenseman.
And,
It was always going to be the last 2 years are going to suck, right?
It's
right?
always
But
going to be that
everyone
way.
thought that they have cups in the bank by then. Wouldn't matter.
Exactly. And you would always think if they won a cup in the first 5 years, Tavares was here, you wouldn't care about paying him because you'd be like, we got our money's worth. Have they got their money's worth? That's the question. I don't think if you're talking about poor contracts in terms of getting your money's worth, given where the Leafs have gone with Tavares, then yeah, you could argue one of the worst contracts just because it hasn't paid the ultimate return. And no one wears that more than he does. To his credit, no one tried. Like, you watch that playoff series against Boston, who on the ice was trying harder than he was to make something happen? It's just that he's 33, 34. And at a certain point, those last 2 years, like you say, you give them the big deal to get their best years, and then you're stuck at the end with some of maybe not their best.
Okay, let's fast forward in our heads to next spring. The Leafs qualify for the postseason, and the Leafs are out in the first round. What happens now?
Oof. If that were to happen again, I mean, you've done the coach bit. You may or may not have parted ways with certain players, depending on how the next couple of months go. At that point, I mean, you're locked into Austin Matthews, you're locked into William Nylander, Morgan Riley. Question marks about Mitch Marner and John Tavares as of now. So are those two players still here? Do they still want to be here? That's a question. And is Brendan Shanahan still here? We believe he's in the last year of his deal. is he still a part of this group as well? And those would be the huge changes that you have to make. Is you can't keep this core after this year, not after you've changed general managers, you've changed coaches. If this is it, if this is Shanahan's swan song, it's got to be something. There's got to be at least a playoff round win, and probably 2.
Sharman, do you riot?
Oh, I right. Yeah, no. I'm spending the night in jail for sure. If it's the same core 4 and they're doing the same damn thing over and over again, no, I don't think they will. I'm sure they've figured it out. Is doing the same thing over and over again.
This is the last year of the core 4 not.
Yeah.
You can argue running it back only because you changed coaches, and it's a different general manager who didn't put those contracts in place. But after this, you can't waste any more time.
Okay. Let's move on to the Toronto Raptors. The championship was fantastic. Championship was also 5 years ago.
Yeah. No.
This is a very unpopular take, but I will present it. Has Masai's run been too long in Toronto?
It's an interesting conversation to have because I think the first 10 years he built up a championship team. So the residue of that still remains, right? And I think the reputation of that still remains, in building that culture, building a championship type team. How long do you keep that reputation though? And how long does that experience kind of keep you in that position? When does it wear off? It's a fair question. I don't think the moves that they've made over the last 5 years post championship make it so that they are in a position where they have to move on. But eventually, like you guys have said, you kind of want a new set of eyes eventually. When is that eventually? I think that'll be depending on when that residue of the championship wears off, if it already hasn't.
Yeah, because that's the big question. Because if you consider everything that's happened in Toronto sports, we may be looking at maybe the greatest Toronto figure in the last 50 years that has run a franchise in Masai Ujiri.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, his resume, what he's done for the city, what he's been able to do, and, kind of the pan that he's played in order to have a WNBA team to potentially come here as well. That is a huge aspect. I wonder, though, if there is a way in which he can move on to continue doing something with the Toronto Raptors, maybe in a higher role, and then having someone else, another person kind of come in and maybe do something else. Maybe. But his contract is also up in 2026, so he's probably asking the same question.
Yeah, exactly. Raptors have never signed that enormous, giant free agent.
And they likely won't.
And they likely won't this season. But okay, then let me ask you this, Dennis. How do they rebuild with what they have on the floor right now?
What they've done forever, which is draft really, really well. I think that's the only way.
That takes time, though.
It takes a lot of time. And I think that's why there's a bit of a crunch right now on the front office and pretty much everybody in the organization to make sure that they can get a couple of players that can align with Scotty Barnes' timeline, right? He's turned into an all-star, potentially can turn into an all-NBA player, hopefully eventually a top 10, 15 player in the NBA. In that league, you need those type of players in order to potentially win a championship. They hope he can get there, and they hope they can draft the guys around him to be able to get to that point. That probably means being bad for the next couple of seasons, though. Getting to a point where you can have a top pick next year, a top pick a year after that, and then grow those guys. And hopefully it works out that way.
If you're in the Toronto Raptors front office, would you consider drafting Bronny James to bring that mainstream spotlight to the franchise?
No, I don't think. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I'm sure you guys have seen the videos and whatnot. Look, Bronny is going to have all the limelight on him wherever he goes, but I don't think that makes the most sense for the Raptors. He might actually turn into a decent player eventually in his career, but that's not. The Raptors right now aren't in a position to go and get someone just to attract viewership. I think it's about cultivating the real type of growth that they need from their core, which is, Scotty, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett. How they can facilitate that is through the draft, but not through guys like Bronny James.
Okay. Let me throw this to the group then. So there's always been that rumor, and we don't know how factual it is, but wherever Bronny James goes, maybe dad follows. Would that not look good, Sharman, to have a LeBron James in his? I know he's in the last years of his career, his Hall of Fame career, his first ballot, to have a Raptor jersey. Wouldn't that be kind of cool while we're sitting there enjoying 25 win seasons?
It would be cool, but we're not a circus here in Toronto. Right?
We're not
a legitimate sports town.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I hope
with you.
so. Yeah.
The Raptors fans are patient.
Yeah.
They've shown that in the past, right? And I know it's 5 years ago, but they're still hanging on to that championship, right?
Yeah.
We have, TFC fans did it for long enough as well. That's kind of gone away now, certainly.
Yeah.
So I don't think you need it. Sure, it's cool. It'd be great. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But is it what's best for the actual franchise? I don't think so.
Andrew, you don't like a circus?
I wouldn't mind a circus, but I'm a person who can as far as like the teams that aren't the Blue Jays go, I can check out for a couple of years and be like, oh, I'll check the box score or whatever. And you see a lot of that when everybody is. I've heard a lot of this year with the Blue Jays, just tear it all down, burn the whole thing to the ground, and it's like, well, yeah, that's okay if you have 5 years where you just are not going to pay attention to this franchise at all. That's not fun to me. Yeah. That's not fun to a lot of fans, and I think that that's why you do, like James says, we want to meticulously and build up the franchise, do what's right for the franchise, and that circus, while fun, I don't think seems like I don't think that's the right way to go.
LeBron James as a Raptor.
No one likes
you're
a
not
gimmick.
You're not buying that
No
jersey.
one wants a gimmick,
No.
and especially not when how when a player goes back to a team that they used to, and it's like you want just that one. When has that ever worked out?
Yeah.
It's like it's great for the first couple games, but then you're sort of like, well, now you're taking up a roster spot from someone who could actually potentially do something.
I mean, the Raptors have gone through this with Hakeem Olajuwon. Like they went for him, and that's one of those pictures that's famously known as like polar bear in Texas type of thing. It's like, what is he doing here? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So.
I was very excited
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, it was supposed to be cool, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's be optimistic now. Let's look in the crystal ball. 5 years from now, which fan base 5 years from now in Toronto should be most optimistic?
5 years.
5
It's
years.
a long time. In
There's so much that can happen
Yeah.
in 5 years. Where were we 5 years ago?
A championship, rounds of playoffs still happening, right?
First
Round of playoffs still
still
happening.
Austin's contract's up, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah,
so
true.
in 5 years, well, all right. Let's optimistically. I would say the Maple Leafs.
Okay.
Optimistically, because if this season goes the way that they want it to, finally, you re-sign Mitch Marner, you are able to rebuild your blue line a little, you get a goaltender. If things go right, then you can attract some free agents, you can rebuild without having to rebuild. I think in 5 years, you could be in a good spot still.
Optimism?
I think the Maple Leafs are probably the right answer there. Right? I mean, it's just easier for them to bring in free agents just in that, maybe you'll get a little hometown discount from guys, and they already have Matthews. They already have Nylander. They're in a good spot there. Their foundation is pretty good, even if it obviously has been a little bit less than ideal the last few years. But I will say for the Blue Jays, the thing that would give me optimism, or does give me optimism in terms of when I look at this team, is the way that the payroll has gone. And they are in a place in terms of payroll that is way above and where anybody, including Mark Shapiro, just a couple years ago, thought that this team would ever go. And that could be a real difference maker. And they are also at a point right now where there's going to be a lot of turnover. There's a lot of older players. There's a lot of guys' contracts coming up. And if they have the right people in charge, I'm not sure they do, and they manage that turnover well, given the way the baseball sort of works, like I've been saying about the extra playoff spots that are out there and how much easier it is to get into the playoffs. The mushy middle is where a lot of teams are going to be, and I think that once you get into the playoffs, it's chaotic, and there's a chance you could be the Diamondbacks and you could be 32-39 in the second half and still go make a run to the World Series. So the Blue Jays could be, a pretty good team, even if they're not great, and I think also have a chance to really to manage their roster turnover well. If they have the right people in place to do it.
Okay, let's close on this. Which Toronto team has the least to look forward to in the next 5
Could it
years?
also be the Leafs?
Quite possibly.
I will tell you that no matter what you want to talk about in sports, you can always bring it back to the Leafs. You can look at every side of this team, and there is just they are the ultimate wild card because you just don't know. But I mean, the Jays, maybe. It depends. It's like there's the uncertainty there when we're talking about with Atkins and Shapiro and what they're going to do, and the fact that you can't get a beat on them. I don't know.
if they choose to not spend the money to the levels they've been doing, they could shrink up very easily for sure. And that's, I wouldn't rule that out given the people above the people in charge.
Because 5 years from now, the Raptors could be back in the right direction.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think basketball works kind of like baseball in the sense that a lot of teams operate in that mushy middle because of the play-in tournament. There's this opportunity to grow and kind of develop that way. And so the natural cycle for the Raptors is to eventually become a play-in team, maybe likely next year or the year after, and then after that become a playoff team and try to compete. I think in the next 5 years, I don't necessarily know what will happen with the Maple Leafs, but I think second to them might be the Raptors in terms of bright futures, just because they have the facilities, they have the general manager and president of basketball operations to be able to build this team to a winner.
James Sharman?
I do want to believe in John Herdman though too. So.
I
you have
believe
the final
in him.
word.
Yeah, I believe in Herdman absolutely, and also Jason Hernandez, the GM. But in 5 years' time, there's no Insigne, there's no Bernadeschi, probably no Osorio. There's no blue chip prospects there right now, but MLS, that's not a big deal.
You can buy it.
You can buy it, right? If ownership remains committed to the team,
Yeah,
and that's still a big question, right? In 5 years' time, there's post World Cup. Who knows where the sport is in this country?
Sure.
So it could be great, could be awful. I don't know. 5 years in professional sports is a lifetime.
Well, I also think we would be remiss not to mention in terms of optimism would also be the PHWL team here.
absolutely.
Because if not for Natalie Spooner's injury, we could be talking about a championship team right there. So that's a bright future as well.
Absolutely. Well, this has been the Sports Interactions State of Toronto. Thanks for joining.
It's a state.